I wanted to see if I could automate virtual machine deployments. I've set a few rules. No pressure. All right, we've started developing our first workflow, but we've got to learn how to do binding. Now, let me be really clear about this. You have to learn how to do binding. So please get ready and let's learn about binding. Now, the way this is going to work is we're going to put that information into some variables of our own. So our workflow is going to have some variables, and those variables are going to hold the necessary information. What we need to do then is to bind our workflow variables to the inputs that we see here. These inputs that we see in this list here are the inputs for this workflow. We need to create our own and bind to the other workflow's inputs. Now, you actually have some flexibility here how you do this exactly. So there are different ways to go about creating these variables. You can go to the Variables tab, or if you go over here, you can choose to create a new variable from here. Additionally, you can click on Inputs and Outputs to create a different type of variable. We'll talk about what inputs and outputs are in a moment, but let's do it this way. Let's go over here and let's set up the name of the virtual machine that we want created. Now, obviously, we don't want this workflow to always use the exact same name. So we're going to need to set this up in a way that's flexible. Let's click on Select Variable for VM name, and we'll choose Create New. And whether you click Create New here, or you go to the Variables or Inputs Outputs tab, either place you go to, you can say, I want to create a new one, and it'll pop up this window that allows you to create either a new variable or something similar called an input. Variables allow you, the workflow developer, to set the value of this variable. On the other hand, inputs get their value from the end user. I'll tell you what, let's let the end user pick the name of their virtual machine. Again, if you want the end user to pick, you'll choose input. And we're going to give our input a name. So this one's going to be the virtual machine name. If we want to, we could use the default name, or you can change it to something else. If you'd rather this be a variable called virtual machine name, that's totally fine. You just need to have a legal name here according to the rules of JavaScript. Now, I'm going to type a description so that the user will know and my fellow developers will know what this input's for. So let me type a description here. Our inputs can have different types, such as string, number, Boolean, and a whole bunch of others, hundreds and hundreds of different types. But ultimately, what we're going to do is say we want an input, give it a name, give it a description, and click Create. So again, this here is an input that exists in my workflow. And what we're doing is binding it to this input of the other workflow. All right, next up, we need to say which guest operating system we want to have installed. Now, obviously, in the end, we might want to give the user the choice of select operating systems that we want them to deploy. But for right now, I'm going to set this up so that they don't have a choice of what operating system. So to do that, that's a great instance where you'd want to create, instead of an input, you'd want to create a variable. So let's go click on Select Variable, Create New. And in here, I'll go ahead and go with I'm going to change the name slightly here. So Virtual Machine Guest OS. And again, I'll type a description. Notice, by the way, that I always type a description for every single workflow I create, every single variable, every single input, and every single output. I always type descriptions because that's going to help other people, such as other Orchestrator developers, to know what each of these different things are. I don't want the developer to have to open up my workflow and study it to learn what I'm asking for, whether that's an input, output, variable, or whatever. So type descriptions. This is a special type of object called a VC::virtual machine guest operating system or something like that. The thing I want you to recognize here, though, is that in these types, when you see VC::something, That VC : means that this is an object type that's defined by the vCenter plugin. On the other hand, if you saw something such as email : message, that would be an object type that's defined by the email plugin. All right, so next up, we need to pick a value. So what operating system do we want installed? Well, we could install things like Windows. So just type a portion of the operating system and select one. Or we could type exciting things such as Linux or this or that. As I'm sure you already know, vSphere supports lots of different types of operating systems. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose, not just for nostalgic purposes, but also to keep the size of these VMs down as small as possible, I'm going to pick good old Microsoft DOS. So we'll choose DOS and we'll click Create. Great. We've bound 2 of our inputs, but there are a whole bunch more. And there's an output that we have to bind. Join me in the next video and I'll show you how.